There's a pattern in history that has toppled three major governments in the last 250 years. And right now, in 2025, the United States is moving through that pattern, stage by stage, grievance by grievance, almost as if we're reading from the same script, written in blood and chaos. In 1789, France was the cultural and political center of Europe. Within 5 years, the monarchy collapsed, the king was executed, and the terror consumed tens of thousands. In 1917, Imperial Russia minus 180 million people, centuries of dynasty, unraveled in months. The Tsar fell. Civil war followed. Millions died. In 1959, Cuba transformed from a prosperous Caribbean nation into a revolution-led dictatorship that would last 6 decades. 3 revolutions, 3 different centuries, 3 different ideologies, and the same sequence of breakdown. This is not about isolated riots or political change. A revolution is a systemic rupture. The old order is destroyed and replaced, often by something worse. Revolutions don't come from poverty alone. Poverty has always existed. Revolutions happen when expectations exceed reality, when a large portion of society believes they deserve better, and when institutions no longer offer any remedy. John F. Kennedy put it plainly: "Those who make peaceful revolution impossible will make violent revolution inevitable." History proves that line again and again. To recognize the danger and to understand why it can move faster than anyone expects, we need a clear model. Across France, Russia, and Cuba, the uprising followed 6 stages. I'll show you those stages. Then we'll walk them through France, step by step. Stage 1. Extreme wealth inequality. This is the foundation. When a tiny elite controls politics, land, and wealth, while the majority struggles for bread, resentment accumulates. Inequality alone doesn't topple states, but it creates the tinder. Stage 2. Government corruption and incompetence. Elites use the state to protect privilege. The public sees the rulers enrich themselves while public services fail. That perception destroys legitimacy. Stage 3. Middle-class radicalization. Revolutions often ignite when those who should defend the system, lawyers, merchants, teachers, soldiers, lose faith and turn against it. When the middle class radicalizes, the system loses its cushion. Stage 4. Loss of faith in institutions. Courts, parliaments, police, elections. When these stop resolving grievances, people stop believing in peaceful avenues. That's the threshold. Stage 5. Revolutionary movement gains mass support. Organized groups offer a coherent alternative. Popular desperation turns into collective action. Stage 6. Government overthrown and chaos follows. Old orders fall. Violence fills the vacuum. The promised utopia rarely arrives. Instead, purges, terror, and new dictatorships often take hold. Now, let's put the model into motion with the mother of modern revolutions. France, 1789. Paris was the capital of taste and power. The monarchy had ruled for centuries. The court at Versailles glittered with art and ceremony. But beneath the gilt, the rot was total. Stage 1. Extreme inequality. France in the 1780s counted 27 million people divided into 3 estates. The clergy owned land and paid no taxes. The nobility, roughly 400,000 people, held vast estates and privileges. The third estate, everyone else, bore the tax burden. Peasants and urban workers paid the bills for the lavish lifestyle of the few. Bread was the staple, and by 1788, a bad harvest pushed prices so high that bread consumed nearly 9/10 of a peasant's earnings. When the price of bread doubled, people literally could not eat. The inequality was visible. Daily, in empty bowls and glittering banquets at Versailles. Stage 2. Government corruption and incompetence. King Louis XVI was indecisive. The crown's finances, decimated by wars, including support for the American Revolution, were a catastrophe. Ministers proposed reform. The privileged refused. The state borrowed more, taxed the poor more, and fixed nothing. The system had become rigged. Money flowed to elites while the public safety net frayed. Stage 3. Middle class radicalized. The Third Estate included not only peasants, but lawyers, merchants, and professionals, the emerging bourgeoisie. They demanded political representation and fiscal fairness. When Louis convened the Estates General in 1789, an assembly not seen in 175 years, he expected to legitimize new taxes. Instead, the Third Estate demanded one person, one vote, not the archaic estate system. When denied, they staged a constitutional act. They declared themselves the National Assembly and vowed not to disperse until France had a constitution. This is the moment the middle class stopped propping up the old order. Stage 4. Loss of faith in institutions. On July 14, 1789, Parisians stormed the Bastille, a symbol of royal tyranny. The spectacle was devastating because it proved institutions no longer protected the people or resolved grievances. The monarchy's authority evaporated. Local communities began to take power. The very idea that the courts or the crown could arbitrate was broken. From that point, events accelerated. Radicals filled the vacuum. The Jacobin pushed beyond constitutionalism toward revolutionary justice. The revolutionary apparatus radicalized, and the revolution devoured moderates. The guillotine did not discriminate. For a generation, France convulsed. Terror, war, and then the ascent of Napoleon. The French Revolution teaches the core lesson. Inequality plus corruption plus institutional collapse creates a vector that travels fast. When the middle class abandons the system and institutions lose legitimacy, the path to mass revolution is open. Now that we've seen how France collapsed, let's jump forward 128 years to Russia, 1917, where the exact same six-stage sequence replayed itself almost line for line. By 1917, the Russian Empire was enormous, minus 180 million people, 11 time zones, and a royal dynasty that had ruled for 300 years. On the surface, it looked immovable. But beneath the imperial facade, the same structural cracks were widening. Stage 1. Extreme wealth inequality. Russian society was still practically feudal. The Tsar and the nobility owned the land, the wealth, and the political system. 80% of Russians were peasants who owned nothing. In the cities, factory workers endured brutal hours, starvation wages, no protections, and child labor. Meanwhile, the elite attended lavish balls and lived in palaces that looked untouched by reality. The gap was medieval and unsustainable. Stage 2. Government corruption and incompetence. Tsar Nicholas II wasn't malicious. He was disastrously out of touch. He believed he ruled by divine right, immune to criticism and reform. In 1905, workers marched peacefully to petition for better conditions. The Tsar's troops opened fire. Hundreds were killed. It became known as Bloody Sunday, and it destroyed the monarchy's moral authority. Then came World War I. Russia entered the war in 1914, and it was a disaster. Millions died. Supply chains collapsed. Soldiers fought without ammunition. Entire divisions surrendered because they had no bullets. The SR still lived in luxury. His closest advisor was a mystic named Rasputin. Women protesting food shortages were joined by workers. The army was ordered to restore order, but the soldiers mutinied. When the military will not defend the government is finished. Russia's parliament, the Duma, demanded Nicholas abdicate. On March 15, 1917, he stepped down. 3 centuries of Romanov rule ended not with a war, but with a signature. A provisional government took over, promising liberty and reform. But they made one fatal mistake. They kept Russia in the war. The soldiers wanted peace. The people wanted food. The government delivered neither. Stage 4. Loss of faith in institutions. The provisional government lost legitimacy within months. Elections were delayed. Reforms were slow. Conditions worsened. Into that vacuum stepped a disciplined revolutionary faction, Vladimir Lenin and the Bolsheviks. They offered simple promises: peace, land, bread. That message resonated with a population exhausted by war and betrayal. Stage 5. Revolutionary movement gains mass support. On October 25, 1917, the Bolsheviks launched their coup. They stormed the Winter Palace and arrested the provisional government. It took less than 24 hours, almost no bloodshed. But what followed was not a peaceful transition. Stage 6. Government overthrown. Chaos follows. Russia plunged into a 4-year civil war from 1918 to 1922. The Red Army versus the White Armies. Foreign intervention. Entire regions burned. The Shika, the secret police, executed enemies of the revolution. Villages were destroyed. Famine killed millions. In July 1918, the Tsar, his wife, and his 5 children were executed in a basement. It symbolized the total annihilation of the old order. By 1922, the Bolsheviks had won, but at a horrific cost. 10 million dead. The economy shattered. Lenin's promises dissolved into dictatorship. And when Stalin took power in 1924, another 20 million died in purges and engineered famines. France and Russia show the same conclusion. Revolutions don't bring freedom. They bring chaos, then tyranny. France and Russia show the same conclusion. Revolutions don't bring freedom. They bring chaos, then tyranny. Now let's move to the most recent example. Cuba, 1959. Stage 1. Extreme wealth inequality. In the 1950s, Cuba wasn't a backward nation. It had one of the highest standards of living in Latin America. Havana was the Monte Carlo of the Caribbean. Casinos, nightlife, American investment. But the wealth was concentrated almost entirely in Havana, and among elites connected to President Fulgencio Batista. The rural poor lived in crushing poverty. American corporations owned the best land. The profits flowed to foreign investors and local oligarchs. Stage 2. Government corruption and incompetence. Batista seized power in a 1952 coup. He canceled elections. The police were for sale. Opponents were imprisoned or murdered. Mobsters ran casinos with Batista's blessing. The government stopped serving the public entirely. It served itself. This fueled deep resentment, especially among educated young Cubans who saw their country being looted. Stage 3. Middle-class radicalized. Fidel Castro wasn't a peasant. He was a lawyer, part of the educated class. He could have joined the elite, but he pursued revolution instead. In 1953, he launched a failed attack, was arrested, and released. He fled to Mexico, rebuilt his movement, and returned in 1956 with 82 fighters. After an ambush, only 20 survived, yet they persisted, hiding in the Sierra Maestra Mountains. Batista's brutality only expanded support for Castro. Every village burned by the army produced more rebels. Stage 4. Loss of faith in institutions. By 1958, everyone knew the game was rigged. Elections were fake. Courts were controlled. Police were corrupt. The United States, Batista's longtime patron, began distancing itself. Stage 5. Revolutionary movement gains mass support. Castro's 26th of July movement grew rapidly. Students, intellectuals, peasants, and ordinary workers joined the cause. Not because they supported communism, but because Batista was intolerable. By late 1958, Batista's army was collapsing. Soldiers deserted. Officers fled with bags of cash. On January 1, 1959, Batista fled the country. Castro entered Havana days later to cheering crowds. Stage 6. Government overthrown. Chaos follows. Castro promised democracy. He delivered dictatorship. Opposition leaders were executed in mass trials. Newspapers were shut down. Property was nationalized. Business owners fled or were imprisoned. Cuba became a one-party communist state for the next 60 years. Just like France, just like Russia. The revolution devoured the country it promised to save. The 6-stage pattern across all 3 revolutions. Despite different cultures, centuries, and ideologies, every revolution followed the same path. 1. 3 countries. 3 centuries. 3 collapses. 1 sequence. And here is the part that matters most. Every single one of these warning signs is present in the United States right now. Not emerging active. Not the beginning of the pattern. Stage 4. The next 2 stages come fast. Often in months. Rarely in decades. Can history says exactly where that leads.